Thank you, Stuart. It's a pleasure. We are really proud to be invited to your event, to be talking to your customers or partners, and the audience, that follows BCPS. Super glad to be here, and I think this is a very exciting topic. It's very close to my heart. I'm sure it's also very close to Fernando's heart. The topic of environmental sustainability. And I think this topic it's growing. It's becoming more and more important, and that's the reason I decided to shift my career. In the first place, I'm an animal scientist. I have a animal production in my background. I manage a farm. I grew up, working for the agribusiness sector. I work for genetic companies, for animal health companies. This has been my first experience in the nutritional side. But in the last 7 years, I shift my career towards sustainability because I saw this in talking to producers around the world, in visiting processors, retailers in the food value chain, in the animal protein value chain. I saw that sustainability was becoming more and more important. And many times people wouldn't use the term sustainability, but you would see a farmer getting pressure to move, to cage-free production system. You would see a retailer getting pressure, to report their carbon emissions. You would see farmers, like I saw in India, committing suicide because they could not use their groundwater anymore because the water table was falling down, or because, it was getting contaminated with nitrates. So I saw across the world, droughts, pests, new diseases. There were really impacting, the animal production sector, and all of those would be lumped, together under this sustainability umbrella, and I decided to put a focus on this, and that's when I went to work for WWF, the environmental NGO, on animal protein sustainability, working with the private sector, working with the largest food producers in the world, the biggest retailers of food in the world, in how to create strategies and how to create programs to reduce, to start measuring, sustainability and reduce, the footprints connected to animal proteins. And that's when I had the chance to get some initiatives initiated, like the Global Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the US Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, the Dairy Sustainability Initiative in the US, the Canadian Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. I also took part in the beginning of that initiative, the US Roundtable for Poultry and Eggs, the International Egg Commission and Sustainability Initiative, that it's an ongoing initiative that I continue to be engaged with. And I think it has been a very, challenging journey. This is not an easy topic. Sometimes it's easy to talk about it, but it's not easy to measure and to improve it. Just like it's not easy to produce animals, right? And I think that's where we have to join our efforts and work together on this. And I would like to first start sharing with you, what we see, Fernando and I and the rest of DSM, what we see the biggest challenges. And this slide shows that I think in a very simple way. We have 3 big stakeholder groups out there that are really concerned about this topic of environmental sustainability. And we see the consumers on the left side becoming more and more concerned about how food is produced, how it is produced, what resources it's using, and they're putting some pressure on the food brands and on the retailers. Then we have in the middle the investors, and I see this group as the growing voice in this whole conversation. So investors that want to mitigate their risks, they are the really ones taking into practice, their concerns. And in order to reduce those risks, they're demanding a lot of changes from the companies they have in their portfolios, or the companies they're giving loans to, in the case of banks, or the companies that are they are providing insurance for. And we're going to talk more about this. And then we have the regulators, regulators in the countries. I mean, Canada is a good example of that, right? With this whole discussion of carbon taxes. There are already 36 nations in the world that have carbon taxes, and that number is growing, on a daily basis almost. And also there are countries that are putting some very nice programs to generate incentives and to generate, subsides for environmental footprint reductions. We see that in some countries in Europe. We see that in Thailand, for instance. Thailand has a very exciting program connected to the Paris agreements, where they give premiums to companies that are achieving, their targets in reducing footprints. And all of this obviously has an impact on food. Food is responsible for more or less 24% of all the carbon emissions, only talking about carbon, of all the carbon emissions on the planet when you look at the whole food value chain. And animal proteins is on a global level is responsible for more or less 14% of the total greenhouse gas emissions that humans, generate. And it's responsible for a large amount of water that is consumed. We also consume a lot of natural resources, especially, from the soils, from the land that we need, to grow the raw materials that go into feed. But anyhow, I mean, it's not the worst thing in the world. Food is not the culprit for all the problems, like some people, paint. But we do have our share on environmental footprints, and we have to measure those, and we have to reduce those. But I think the most important thing for us here is that most of those footprints are on the feed. Right? So when we look at any animal protein, we're going to see that between 50 and 80% of the environmental footprints, doesn't matter if we talk about carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, water consumption, or even energy consumption, it's all in the feed. The majority is in the feed. It's not so much in the barns. It's not so much in the processing or in the transportation. It's really in the feed, in the footprints of the raw materials that go into the feed. It's in the production of the feed, but also in how efficient animals are in digesting and using that feed, and then the residues that get out from the animals on the use of that feed. And regulators are concerned about especially those residues, the residue part, right? The part that goes out, and in the form of nitrogen, ammonia, greenhouse gases, and then there are more and more countries putting limitations on those. So this is the landscape, right? This is what we are seeing, and just to go a little deeper on the investor side, we see, for instance, initiatives like this Fair Cooler initiative being formed, where a network of investors, we talk about the largest pension funds, the largest banks, the largest investment funds, but also insurance companies. Just to mention you a number, their total portfolio value. So if you sum up the value of all the companies they own, in the form of the shares they have of those companies, it's worth $30 trillion. So it's bigger than most of the biggest economies in the world. It would be, I think, the third largest country in the world. So it's a serious initiative, and this initiative is ranking, and I have a slide specific on that. They're ranking the 60 largest food companies connected to animal proteins in the world. So you're going to see here companies from the egg industry, from the broiler sector, from milk, from beef, and even aqua. And they're ranking those companies based on their environmental footprints based on their commitments to sustainability, based on the on how well they're reporting, but also reducing their footprints, but also looking at social aspects and animal welfare aspects. And this ranking shows the level of risk that they see. They calculate for these companies. They use a very sophisticated, index methodology or scoring methodology based on how those companies are being transparent about their environmental footprints, on their environmental impacts, but also in how they are improving those, so what plans, what actions they're taking, and how those improvements are happening. And then we see organizations like Rabobank, for instance, creating a carbon credit market, starting to help their customers to get some value for the carbon they're reducing, and even connecting their loans to sustainability targets. So if you want to get a low interest, a longer term, loan, you need to commit to certain sustainability programs or to certain sustainability targets, and you have to show that you are reducing, you are achieving those targets, or you're reducing your footprints. And there are many others, many other financial incentives like that are coming from banks, from investors, that generate benefits for companies, for producers that are tackling environmental footprints. Then we have the consumer side, right? So consumers are becoming more concerned about this topic. I think the pandemic, it's only reinforcing that. I don't know if it's because people are at home now and have more time to think about this, or if people are becoming more and more concerned about what we're doing to the planet. But we see more consumers demanding or looking for ways of using their wallets to vote on what companies they're going to be choosing as suppliers for their food items. And we see many research out there showing that consumers are more and more willing to pay for sustainable foods, even willing to pay more if it's needed to get products that have a better or lower impact to the planet. And they're right in doing that, because food, although is not the largest source of footprints, it's a big one. So in general, more or less between 10 and 30% of a household's carbon footprint is related to food. So what we buy as food items do have an impact on our footprint as citizens, right? So it is one area for us to pay attention to, and there are many cases demanding or looking for carbon labeling or other types of labels on sustainability, and they are more willing to buy from companies that are transparent, the companies that are sharing information on their labels about the environmental footprints as well. And we saw this many decades ago happen with the nutritional labeling, where consumer groups were pressuring the companies to put a label on the nutritional value of their products, especially connected to fat and sugars, or sugar and carbohydrates and calories, and there are some studies out there showing that it works. I mean, you don't see huge reductions, but you do see reductions in the consumption of calories and fat when you start to show, when you start to have the nutritional labels. And there's some studies showing that if you put a carbon label, for instance, there's probably the potential to reduce the carbon emissions by 5%, just by making, being transparent about the carbon emissions that you have in your products. So there are a lot of companies looking into this. Consumer goods products, Unilever, for instance, already announced it by 2035. 70,000 food items that they sell are going to have a carbon emission label on the products. And so they're going to need that information, right? So if they buy poultry items, they're going to need that information from the suppliers that are selling them the poultry items they use in their products. And Walmart already shared their intents as well to have a carbon label on the products that have their own brand, especially on the food side. And when I worked for WWF, we had relationships with Walmart, and I remember close to 40% of their total footprint on the scope 3, which is the footprint from the products they're selling, which is 95% of their footprints. It's connected to food, and if you look at that 40%, 29 or close to 30% of the total Walmart, footprint is from animal protein. So it is an area that we're going to see Walmart moving on for sure. And this is another study, just to reinforce the message that consumers are really not only are planning to or are willing to pay more for sustainable driven products, but this is already happening. So this study from New York Stern happened, was done in July 2020, so not long ago, and saw that sustainability market products grew 7.1 times faster than the conventionally market products. So products that have some kind of a sustainability claim or have a label or have a certification connected to sustainability grew faster and by a higher degree than the products that don't have that. And those products are responsible for more than half of the growth of the consumer good products, and despite the COVID-19 pandemic. So they enjoy a price premium as well. And they said that it's clear that companies who are not pursuing sustainability strategies will be increasingly left behind. So very strong message from New York University that was published in Bloomberg. It was published at the Harvard Business Review magazine. So it's available there if you want to look at the details of that. And all of this pressure, from investors, from consumers, this is already turning into solutions from companies, right? And here I have 3 examples from 2 different industries, from the beef sector, from the dairy sector, of how some companies or even whole industries are reacting to this pressure, right? To this urgency to improve and to address environmental sustainability. So we have this company, Marfrig. It's a slaughterhouse meat company from Brazil. It's the second largest after JBS, and they launched a product line called Viva, which is a product line for carbon neutral beef. So they have been working on years for this with a group of producers, and still a niche program, but they have plans to grow this, although they know this is not going to be their main product line, but they want to see growth on this product line. It's a beef that it's produced with a series of practices, good producing practices, also integrated with forests, so they can have a beef that is carbon neutral. So zero net emissions of carbon, and they're getting a very substantial price premium for that. Arla, big dairy processor, from Europe, it's already selling a carbon neutral milk, although part of this carbon neutrality is coming from carbon credits, more or less like what Maple Leaf is doing in Canada, right, with pork and poultry. So Maple Leaf is already carbon neutral. A fantastic example from Canada of how you should do things. but it's a lot of that is coming from carbon credits, and over time, what those companies will do is they're going to be replacing those carbon credits by reductions they can get from their own value chain, from their own producers. And if 70% of the footprints are in the feed or are in the animals that are eating that feed, there's no way out. You're gonna have to work with the farms. You're gonna have to reduce the footprint of that feed and of those producers. And another example is from the dairy industry, where they are discussing even the development of a industry-wide zero carbon target, and that's already in US, right? US, the whole industry already through the Dairy Innovation Center, they release already a industry-wide commitment to become carbon neutral by 2050, and now the discussion is now moving to the global level. So probably very soon we're going to see the global dairy industry committing to become carbon neutral and setting targets between now and then in how to get there. And then when we look to the egg industry, what do we see, right? When we look at the products, we see products that are very plain and very cheap. I even feel sorry, for the producers that are connected to a product that is sold by 97 cents. I don't even know how you guys can do this, because it's so cheap. And I was comparing, last time I went to Walmart, comparing, what I could buy with 97 cents with the nutritional value that eggs have. I couldn't find anything. I couldn't find some candies, but 100% sugar, horrible products, and they would cost even more than eggs. So this is the shocking reality, right? That we see, that there's still a huge demand for low cost products, and that many times the retail competition puts us in this situation. But at the same time, at the same supermarket, you see next to those eggs, you see this egg here that is sold for 2.67. So how many times higher than, so at least two more times higher price than that plain egg, and they are promoting that this egg has less fat, has more vitamins, so it's very much focused on the nutrient content, right? Saying that it's higher on vitamins, and this is working, although it's more than double the price of the plain eggs. If you look at this is public information from the CalMain annual report, you're going to see that this is growing a lot. This is growing a lot in their sales. In a few years, it grew from 0 to now 24% of their sales and of volumes, and 40% of the sales revenue. So not a small growth. And if you read their strategies there, it's public available. You see that they want to grow this type of product lines, right? And I wouldn't be surprised that soon they're going to be also including environmental footprints and environmental sustainability information, which we already see in some products in Europe, like this egg, for instance, in France, that is an egg that is sold by €2.61, a box of 12 eggs. And what they claim is that they have a direct connection. It's a cooperative that has a direct connection with the producers, and the producers get a higher share of the price. And they even show, how much the producers are getting. In this case, they're getting €0.99, and they show how much the other players are getting. So very much focused on the social aspect, on securing that producers are getting a fair price, are getting the right share or higher share of the final price of the eggs. So really playing on the social side. and they're also looking at how to include, the environmental portion. Then another example would be this egg that is sold at the Lidl supermarket chains across Europe, especially in the Netherlands. They have a partnership with this company called Kipster, a very progressive egg producer that developed a new methodology to grow the birds. It's not exactly free range. It's a mix between cage-free and free range, but with white chicken, and they already produce eggs that are carbon neutral. They're using 100% of their feed is based on byproducts from bakery, and they don't buy any corn or soybeans, and with that they can produce a very low carbon egg, although they're using the a kind of cage-free system, and they are selling their eggs for 3.38 euros and 68 cents, which is a medium price if you look at the prices in Europe. So it's not the most expensive, but they're getting a very good price for their eggs, and they're growing like crazy. They're selling everything, and they have plans now to expand into the US. One important thing is that when you start to work with sustainability, when you start to be concerned about sustainability, and you start to measure your environmental footprints, the last thing that you want is to get your products being judged by global averages, right? So you are guilty until you prove the contrary. And if you look at the global averages of all different food items here, you can see beef, for instance, with a very high 60 kilos of CO2 equivalent per kilo of product. And again, this is a global average. And here you are including animals from Africa, from Asia, that takes 5 years to go to slaughter. But also you are putting here the steers that are producing feedlots in Canada or US, then in 16 months, are already slaughtered, with a much lower footprint than this. But that's how people are judging things, right? And I think it's not fair. But we are also, and I see we from the animal protein sector are also not doing our part in sharing what are our specific footprints, right? So we have to be more vocal. We have to be more active in saying that, hey, wait a second, this global average for poultry meat of 6 kilos of CO2 equivalent, or this global average of 4.5 does not apply to me, because I'm much more efficient. I have a program to reduce my footprints. I have been improving my efficiencies for many years, and I can have a much lower footprint. But until we don't have that footprint calculated, we cannot show that, right? We cannot talk about it, and also we cannot improve. We cannot continue to improve if we don't know where we are. So I think as an industry, we have a great nutritious product, fantastic product to sell both eggs and chicken, and it's a fantastic product. It's well accepted. Everybody likes it. We have hard work people. We have the science. We have innovation and technology. We have the customer interest, so everybody's interested. Hey, guys, what you're doing sustainability? I'm interested in learning more about it. I'm interested in hearing you. But what we are missing then? We're missing the measurement, right? We have to measure. We have to speak the language of sustainability. It's not enough to say, hey, I've been here for 3 generations. Is there anything more sustainable than that? It's not enough. Or I am protecting all the trees around my farm. That's not enough. We have to measure things. We have to show things on the same language that all these investors and consumers and regulators are demanding or measuring things with, and then show that we can improve, that we have been improving, and that we continue to improve. The good news, everyone, is that there is a methodology for that. There is a methodology called LCA, the life cycle analysis, which is a metric system that allows us to take farm data, feed data, and transform into environmental footprints, into, for instance, kilos of CO2 per kilo of product, or in terms of gallons of water, in terms of kilos of nitrogen or phosphorus or ammonia that we are emitting. So it's a fantastic methodology, it's science proven, it's well accepted. It has a lot of methodologies, databases, and calculation tools that you have to use in order to be credible, in order to be accepted in how you calculate these footprints. But they are very serious organizations, as you can see some of them here, the LEAP, the FAO LEAP, the ISO 14040 methodology, IPCC guidelines for carbon emissions, the PATH guidelines from the European Union. There are also specific guidelines, on how you should account for even feed additives that you include in your feed, how you should account for the footprints of those. So there is the methodology, there is the guidelines, there is well accepted. And when you apply all of this and you apply to your specific production system, you're going to find some very interesting information like this one here from Blanc Consultants. Blanc is a leading consulting firm in calculating footprints for agriculture, for food, and they do a lot of work in animal proteins as well. This is from a study they published in 2016 showing the environmental footprints of a modern egg farm using advanced methodologies, and they got to a total 1.6 kilos of CO2 emissions per kilo of eggs produced, so much lower, right, than that 4.5 that we saw there of the global average. And again, they proved that the big majority of this footprint was coming from the feed. And by looking into the data, we can see there's room for, even here, even with a lower amount than the global average, is still we have room for improvements. And that is something that we wanted to show with you, and that Fernando will be able to demonstrate to you in more details. In order for us to be connected to the Sustainable Development Goals and to be addressing sustainability the way those stakeholders are looking for, in the way that we can be credible, we think we have to look at this 6 platforms, this 6 areas. Those are the key areas for us to address when it comes to environmental footprinting. One is helping tackle antimicrobial resistance, so using solutions that allows us to reduce the amount of antibiotics we use, especially the ones that compete with humans. Reduce our reliance on marine resources. This is very much connected to the use of fish oil, so solutions that can replace fish oil in the feed. Reducing emissions from livestock, not only the methane emissions, the carbon emissions, but also phosphorus, nitrogen. Those are growing concerns, especially for areas that are connected to watersheds. Making efficient use of natural resources, so how we can produce more with less, reducing the amount of raw materials that are connected to natural environments and natural resources. So for instance, how we can reduce the amount of soy or corn that we have in our diets, and be less dependent on those and use more byproducts, for instance, right? And improve the quality of the animal proteins that we produce by reducing food loss and waste. We know that by improving the nutritional value of meats, we can reduce, their spoilage time. We can we can increase their shelf time. We also can increase, the resistance of the egg shelves through nutrition, and with that, reduce the breakage of eggs, and so on and so forth. And also improve the lifetime performance of animals, so produce more, with the same animals. With that, we dilute, environmental footprints is the best way, and it's the way that the industry has been working for decades, right, in how we make things better. We have to continue that pathway. Science-based feed additive solutions can be important contributors, There's a lot of things that we can reduce with feed additives. The good thing about feed additives is that you don't have to make huge investments. You don't have to change your production systems. It's just something that you add to your diet. You make changes to your diet, and then you get very important impacts on greenhouse gas emissions, on the use of raw materials, on the reductions of land use and water use, on the nitrogen phosphorus flows, because by having, for instance, a low crude protein diet, you're also going to have less nitrogen being excreted. By having less phosphorus in your feed formulation, you're going to have less phosphorus getting out of the birds. So a lot of gains by using with feed additives like enzymes, carotenoids, vitamins, antimytoxins, eubiotics, and many other innovations that are coming into the market. We have an example here, and this is my last slide, and then we go into Fernando, because Fernando is going to share with you some very cool data from real cases. This is also a case that was done to road test the LEAP guidelines from FAO. This was peer review, and we found some very interesting reductions in environmental footprints. Just to stick with the climate change in broilers, 13% reduction in CO2 emissions. This is using all the methodology that is given by FAO LEAP, and with that, but just by adding a few feed additives to a diet, you get reduction that is double digit, that is quite impressive, and without any costs, because in fact, by adding these feed additives, you have a higher profitability, you have a higher productivity, and with that, you reduce footprints along with improvements in your business, which is a win-win, right? Win-win for business and for planet. With that, Fernando, I pass the word to you. Fernando, are you there?
So I'm trying to mute myself. All right, and the weather here in Cambridge, Ontario doesn't help. It's snowy today. I know that you guys in BC are probably playing golf right now, but that's not the case here. Anyway, I want to discuss with you exercises that we've been performing in benchmarking layers for North America. The first caution, we want to get away from those averages that somebody is putting for the whole egg industry. In the past, we have LCA studies that put the basis for all these from Dr. Pelletier, our very own Dr. Pelletier from BC, and people in the US as well. And in Europe, we have long consultings setting the basis of what is the LCA for layers and doing an excellent job. And what we want to do where we are moving is to have these LCAs, but in your farm, in your particular situation, with your feed, with your productivity, in any different situation. And it's where we are moving. So you are rewarded individually for what you are doing. And in these kind of studies, just to set what we did, we use a functional unit, 1 kilo of eggs, and the system boundary is from cradle to farm gate. Of course, some of the things, some of the benefits, if we talk instead of producing eggs, it will be eggs that are edible, are on the table. Then it's a little bit outside of what we are doing here. We are going to evolve towards having CO2 emissions, for example, per protein, not per kilo of product. Because right now, if we do it by protein, we are better than milk. We as egg, sorry, I'm very partial to eggs, but the egg industry is better than the milk industry. in terms of the content of eggs that we have. But really we want to have the power of improving, the power of measuring in the hands of the farmer, in the hands of the feed mill, so we can get where we are, and we can measure what we are doing as an individual. So this is the first starting point, from cultivation to egg farm. The next one, I have control? No. Next one, okay. In order to do this, we use a standard methodology that it was previously described by Carlos Saviani, based on international standards, and that's where we are using. The only different situation here is that we are using a very simple program that you can make the inputs of your farm directly and get the results right away. It's not anymore a very complicated study. It's something that you can do right away. So next one, please. And this methodology works across 16 different categories that are included in the life cycle assessment. Some of them are in the domain of human health, and those are ozone depletion, ionizing, photochemical, respiratory inorganics, and some others. Some of them are still in development. We don't have the best of the handling of the situation, but we are getting there. And some of them are in the ecosystem domain. And in the ecosystem domain, we have air, water, and ground. And we have all the ones that we discussed, like acidification or eutrophication, with the different limiting elements. Either for fresh water, it will be phosphorus; for marine and terrestrial, will be nitrogen. It goes beyond me why in one is moles of nitrogen and the other is kilos of nitrogen. That goes beyond me, but nitrogen is the limiting factor in both of them. Agricultural land occupation in points defined by soil quality index, water scarcity, of course, depending on water availability and so on. So we have 16 different ones that we have to care for. And how important are they will depend on what region are we working for. So water scarcity in BC, maybe it's not necessarily the most important factor that we are going to see. But when we are talking about phosphorus of nitrogen in Holland, that's a very big factor. When we are talking about, in my native northern Mexico, when we are talking about water usage, that's a big factor because water is not so abundant. So that's important for us to understand. We have 16 categories. How important are they depending on where we are? But we have the ability to measure all of them and to make the changes that we need to do in order to reduce our environmental footprint. There is no such a thing as one measurement for environmental footprint. We have several different categories. But next one, please. In this one, in this first approach, the only thing we want to see is how different we are from the previous studies, benchmark studies that we have, two classical ones from the US industry, and a very similar one study that was published in 2017 for the Canadian industry. And in those, we see here that and this is just about the carbon footprint, the kilos of CO2 per kilo of eggs, that is here. And we compare 3 different farms. These are commercial farms with the benchmarks that we have, and they are very similar. Let's see first. This one, the number 4, exactly where right there, that is with the lagoon. And this is, when we use a lagoon, we will have as you see, the emission at housing is very, very high. That body in the middle is very, very high, and is very similar to farm number 1, where we have also a lagoon. And you see that is very close to that 3.5 kilos per kilo of eggs. 3.5 kilos of CO2 per kilo of eggs, that is already way lower than the 4.5 that it is calculated for the whole egg industry in the world. So already it's a big change. And the farm number 2 is not a lagoon. They are using a dry manure system, but they are importing corn. And because they are importing corn, you see, it's said maize there, well, it's corn. They're importing corn, then the CO2 related to corn is way higher than farm number 3 that has the lower CO2 environmental impact. So in the conclusion for this is very similar to what we have in benchmarks, but we are really seeing that for CO2, the lagoon, the manure management is the most important investment if we want to reduce the environmental footprint from 3.5 to 1.5. That's a very big. And the second one, we cannot rely on average on average CO2 impact for the globe. We have to rely on what we have in our own farms. So that's where we want to go. Next one, please. So for the next study, we developed what we call 8 benchmarks. And the first 4 benchmarks are related to cage. In these cage benchmarks, we use a pullet system that was cage. It's average US and Canada. And for the we use a white bird, white eggs, and we use an average length. You will see in a minute what it is. And for this case, we use. Do you think it's local? Okay, those are questions. So yeah, in this case, we use data coming from AgriStats and some specific farms, but this is coming from AgriStats for cages. And for cage, we use top performance producers and average performance producers with or without lagoon. So dry or wet system of manure management. And a similar situation we did in the next one, please, for aviary benchmark. No, the previous one. Yeah, for aviary benchmark, we have a similar setup, but in this case, we use data coming from a Canadian farm that has several different locations for aviary. However, the data for pullets are exactly the same than the previous one, are cage. And in this case, we have a diet that was including a little bit of bakery products, like 10% bakery products. The previous one was a plain corn soy diet. And so that's the setup of the 8 different benchmarks that we have. The next one, please, Carlos. So this is the carbon footprint, and let's get the carbon footprint out of the way first. And you see here that in the moment that we consider a dry manure system, the carbon footprint goes down by half compared with the wet manure system. So right away, we see that whatever we see in the carbon footprint is related mostly to manure system. If we want to improve carbon footprint, that's the first thing that we have to do. We have to go into a dry manure system. And that's right away what is telling us. And also we can see the difference between the different setups that we have. the length of the cycle, 75 weeks versus 60 weeks. The breed, all of them were white. The kilos per hen per cycle are higher also in the cage situation. Of course, we have a longer cycle as well. In the aviary situation, it's lower, 22.5. Nitrogen retention is also different. Feed conversion rate will change between aviary and cage. And that's something that we know for sure, that in aviary, we will have a higher number for FCR than for cages. But also important is to note that in feed conversion rate, we have a good difference between the top and the average performers. So the top and the average performance, right? So about 1.87 versus 187, or 205 versus 195. So even in a situation where the manure management is the same, of course, we will have differences between top and average performers. The next one, please. So when we take manure management out of the way of the equation, then like in the left-hand side, then we see that feed is the main factor. It's 68% of the carbon footprint. The feed is where we want to actually focus our attention, is where we can get the best of it for carbon footprint. And that is where feed is the star. When we are in a wet manure management, really is limited what we can do from the feed standpoint. We have to attack the way we do the wet manure management if your target is to reduce the greenhouse emissions. That's if your target is to reduce the greenhouse emissions. We will see later that this not necessarily has to do with eutrophication on some others, but if you want to do greenhouse emissions, that's where you are. Let's go with the next one, please. In this one, we see different criteria besides what was the greenhouse emissions. And we have the division between housing system, either aviary or cage, and production ranking, top versus average. And let's get this out of the way. The idea here was not to compare housing versus housing, aviary or cage. For that, we have specific studies that you can see. We have beautiful studies published in Canada and in somewhere else in Europe, comparing what is the environmental footprint of different caging systems. We want to see what was to do it in an individual farm with the data. So the way we do it here is instead of carbon footprint, that was the first one, we have eutrophication in freshwater, marine, and terrestrial. And we see between aviary and cage a difference of about between 3.5 to 7%. So there is an important change when we go from cage to aviary, where the eutrophication will go up, either marine or freshwater. That has to do also with the production system and has to do also with that difference in feed conversion rate that we see here is about 4%. That difference also is perceived in land use and in water scarcity, around 3 to 7%. So housing system, yes, it has an impact, an important impact, not just in greenhouse gases, but also in different situations. We will be producing either in aviary or in enriched cages or in cages, depending on the pressure of society, on what we want to do from the marketing standpoint, or we have to do from the production standpoint. That's one thing. How are we going to produce? But inside every one of these, we will have, inside of every one of these production systems, we will have differences between the top and the average. And that's what we see on the right-hand side, top versus average. In the eutrophication, we have changes that goes from 0 to 5 or 7% for eutrophication, either marine or terrestrial. Land use 5%, water scarcity 5%, and not all of them related to feed conversion rate in this case. Feed conversion rate the difference was higher. However, it was not necessarily reflected in the same dimension in the difference in eutrophication, land use, and water scarcity. So that is telling us that we can really work on improving different parameters of the LCA, reducing our environmental impact while reducing the cost of feed produced. So always when we have the top producer will have a lower feed cost than the average producer. And I'm using here 450 Canadian per metric ton. Doug Tisch gave me that number yesterday, and that's what we see as a difference. But that's nothing that you don't know. You are all aware of this. Next, Carlos, please. So I'm going to go very quickly on this. Carlos already discussed the use of feed additives, and there are many enzymes out there, and antioxidants, and mycotoxin preventers, eubiotics, etc., commercially that you can use, and all of them will help us to reduce these emissions. In countries where yolk pigmentation is important, using the right carotenoids will reduce the amount of eggs that are going to be rejected by the supermarket. Taking care of the eggshell strength, we need good vitamins and so on, good organic minerals and so on. But you know all this. Let's use this technology as much as possible in order to reduce the environmental footprint of our farm. What are we going to do in order to reduce this environmental footprint? What is the first step? Depends on what you want to do. Or so could be that you want to tackle environmental methane emissions, or you want to tackle nitrogen, or you want to tackle phosphorus. But you have the option to measure in your farm. The next one, in the next slide, we are going to see an example of one commercial farm, one specific commercial farm in Japan, where we have these interventions. And the intervention is nutritional intervention in this case. In this farm, we have, let me walk you through this graph. This bar is the overall, is the sum of the individual components of the climate change in these. That could be feed, on-farm emissions, pullets, energy, and so on. In this case, in Japan, we saw that about the climate change or greenhouse emissions, gas emissions, were about 45% higher than the benchmark in the US. And all that is coming, or most of it is coming from land use change that is in the feed. Japan is importing pretty much all their soybean and all their corn. And this was done right now. So they were importing mainly from Brazil, and that will increase their land use change. They are charged for land use change, and we see that right from the bat, they were 45% higher than the benchmark. Respiratory inorganics is still higher. Freshwater eutrophication, that's a big deal for them, and they were very, very high, way higher than the benchmark for the US. Same with that, and that is phosphorus, of course. They were not reducing the phosphorus as they should. and therefore we have a big environmental impact on phosphorus. Marine eutrophication, nitrogen, they can do a better job. The next one. So this is what we see from their impact. When we use feed additives, and in this case, it was just an optimum vitamin nutrition and enzymes, we already see that in terms of climate change, even though they are importing all the soybean and the corn, we have a 7% reduction on greenhouse gas emissions. Respiratory inorganics, we have a reduction between 2 to 3%. Eutrophication is a big reduction, also around the 4% in both sides, in the marine and freshwater eutrophication. And most of it is coming, that reduction is coming directly from the feed. Also, when we use a lower protein content in the feed, we use more amino acids, we use proteases and so on. Therefore, we get rewarded by a lower use of soybean, but also by a lower excretion of nitrogen that will have an impact on the marine eutrophication. Right. The next one, please. Speaking only about carbon emissions, we were able to reduce about 97,000 kilos of CO2 in this 100,000 farm case intervention in this case that is taking about if we put the carbon tax on these, it will be $4,800 that we are saving, or 21 cars, or 1,600 seedlings for 10 years. This is 1,600 seedlings, trees that are growing for 10 years, or changing incandescent bulb for LEDs will be around 3,700. So it's a good reduction on emission for these farms, and of course that help us in order to market whatever we want to say to the society and to our buyers, to the retailers where we have the pressure. The next one, please. So just to close, I believe we are kind of on time here. Take a message, measure to improve, like any process. There is tools available right now for you to have your LCA in your farm, in your feed, and we will have to do it in order to get a continuous improvement that is key. And we have to consider societal, environmental, economic factors. We are not going to make less money by being more sustainable. The idea is to raise the price of what we are selling with enriched eggs, with eggs that are environmentally responsible, so we can make even more money. And the first guys, the first companies moving into this space will make more money. That's what we are seeing, at least in Europe. Use all the technological tools to improve, to reduce your environmental footprint, and very importantly, take the opportunity to show your improvements and capitalize on them. So next, so who is going to do it? We have to do it, the industry, us. When we have to do it? Well, the time is now. This is our number one customer. This is our number one customer, the planet. We don't have a plan B. We have to do it. We can't be a successful company in a planet that is failing. And whatever happens in Ethiopia or in Nigeria is affecting us. It's affecting the whole planet. We are not alone. So if it's not us, it's who? If not now, when? We make it possible. Thank you very much. for your time.